Today we've got a 2009 Volkswagen Beetle fitted with a 1.4 petrol engine with roughly 94,000 miles on the clock. As part of the service today on this Volkswagen Beetle, I'm going to be changing the engine oil and filter. And as with all oil changes, I like to pull the dipstick and remove the oil filler cap. Just allows air into the engine as the oil's coming out of the bottom of the engine. Hopefully it'll go a bit smoother. And you can see from the top here, that's the oil filter there, a metal canister, and it's got a hex nut on the end, so you can put a socket on there to loosen it. We've got the 13mm here to remove the sump plug. You can use a spanner, I'll just favour a single hex socket. A bit of grease, you can use engine oil to go on the oil filter seal, and on this particular engine it's a 30mm hex to undo the oil filter. There are a number of oil filter tools on the market you may be able to use, but it's so much easier if you've got a 30mm, either a spanner or a socket. Also handy to have some blue roll and a funnel and maybe a jug. Bit of brake cleaner here for cleaning any spillages. I'm going to start by removing the oil filter because it looks like it's easier to do from the top. I've put a drain tray underneath to catch any drips. This is the new oil filter, as you can see the hex nut there, which is 30mm. I'm using aftermarket parts on this vehicle, non-genuine. As long as you take your registration number to your supplier or dealer outlet, they should be able to recommend the correct parts for your particular engine. The oil filter for this you should be able to get for under £10, depending on what brand you go for. So as I said, you will get some oil out from underneath, dripping out from underneath when you remove this oil filter. And there is a small under tray on this vehicle which you don't have to remove to get to the sump plug, so I'm just going to put some blue roll down there to hopefully catch the worst of the oil that comes out. I can hear it running into the tray, at least I hope it's going in the tray. There we go. One oil filter. I'll leave that on there to drain down. Okay, I've got my new oil filter here. One thing to look at before you screw it on the old filter, make sure the seal is still in it, because they do just pull out. And occasionally I've had them stick to the engine, and you don't want to leave that on there and then try and screw the new one on, it just won't seal properly. Something else to do, I've got a little daub of grease here. You can use grease or oil. It's a good idea just to put a little smear on the seal. Helps to prevent it from sticking. That's it. So you do these just hand tight, but due to the location of the filter, you can't actually get your hand around it, which is possibly why they put the hex on the end. So it doesn't have to be done up really tight. As I say, it's just hand tight. So it's a lot easier just to put this on and nip it up. And that should do nicely. Now we're under the car. You can see that bit of blue roll. I think it's caught most of it, hopefully. So we'll get rid of that. I've got a bit of brake cleaner actually, I'll give that a little squirt. Just to clean off the bit of oil where it's run out of the filter. So the sump plug on this is a 13mm. I tend to use the single hex because it reduces the chance of slipping and rounding it off. One other thing, as you can see, the metal under tray on this convertible has been trimmed off here to allow for access to the plug, which is quite handy. Otherwise you would need to remove this under tray because I believe it went round like this. You might get away with just unbolting the back of it and dropping it down slightly, but obviously the oil's going to splash everywhere, so probably best to remove it completely, which you'll find just a number of fixings around. You should be able to unbolt it, multi-spline fixings and Torx bolts and standard hex bolts on both sides. Hopefully I can undo that with my fingers now, yeah. Make sure you got your drainer or your bucket ready. And remember, the hotter the engine, the further out this is likely to spray. Okay, we'll just leave that now for a while. Let's do its thing. This sump plug, as you can see, it's got a washer on it, as they pretty much all do. Looks like a steel or aluminium washer with a rubber insert. They're normally good to go, again, several times. Just make sure it's clean and it hasn't been crushed or split before you refit it. Let's pop this back in. As you can see, it's been draining for quite a long time now and it's just slowed down to a slow, steady drip. And that'd probably go on all day long if you left it. As with all mechanical fixings, doesn't matter if you've got a car, motorbike, push bike, lawnmower or anything, you'll always find a tightening torque. As long as you're sensible, don't go mad, just nip it up. And that's it. Just give that another little wipe off. Might be a little bit of oil on the under tray there. Okay, we'll drop it down and get some oil in. Back up the top. We'll leave the dipstick pulled. This time just allows air back out of the engine while you're pouring oil in, and hopefully stop it all glugging up and making a mess. Sometimes engines can be really slow fillers. Funnel here and aim it over there a bit. So when I picked up the parts and the engine oil for this one, they recommended 3.5 litres of engine oil. It's not always precise, the quantity that's recommended. So I'm going to go with about 3.3, 3.4 and then run it up and check it. It's much easier just to top up in little dribs and drabs rather than putting 3.5 in and finding that actually that's a bit too much, and then you've got to go back underneath and try and drain out a little bit. It gets a bit messy. Right, so what we'll do next is fire it up. You don't need to rev it. It's not a good idea to rev an engine that's just been started, particularly if it's been drained of oil. Just make sure the oil pressure light goes out. All sounds good. Just let it tick over for a few moments. That should do. All we do now is leave it for 3 or 4 minutes to settle, and then dip the engine oil and see what level we're at. This has been sat for about 5 or 6 minutes now, so let's get this dipstick out, give it a clean. Luckily it's quite clear on this one. You've got a little marked area there. This little bend in the dipstick there would be the minimum, and this bend here would be the maximum. So I'm hoping for somewhere between the two, hopefully near the top without going over. Obviously make sure your car's on a level surface when you do this. And as you can see, that is just under the maximum mark. I'm going to put a tiny dribble in there, but not too much, because the longer it stands, the higher that's going to creep up as the residue oil drains down. It does take a long time for it to drain down, as you can imagine, completely. So I'd say the 3.5 on this particular car was correct. Engine oil, as I'm sure you're aware, there's so many different grades and manufacturers of engine oil out there. But like I said, with collecting vehicle parts, always take your registration number with you, and the supplier will be able to recommend probably several different manufacturers of engine oil, and just go with your budget. But you should be able to pick up 5 litres for around about £50, 40 to £50. So that's been standing again now, another 3 or 4 minutes. Make sure the dipstick is fully home. Lovely. Just fractionally below the maximum mark. That's perfect. So I'm happy with that. Oil filter's tight, sump plug's tight. All that's left to do now, as I do with most of my jobs, is just to give it a little road test, run around the block, and I like to check underneath again just to make sure everything's dry.